Hey everyone, I'm Ellen,
I'm Alyssa.
and this is 2024 Our Story, the podcast where we talk about our lives in the pandemic and hope that one day they'll be useful for other people.
Today, we are going to be talking about core, specifically core one, in the theme that we had this year. We had the theme of truth, and I know that they change the theme every couple of years. So I think this was the second year that they did the theme of truth. So we're just going to be talking about our core classes, our experiences with that, and just how we felt about the theme this year.
Yeah, I have a feeling that most people know what core is if you're listening to this podcast, but I mean, we can also go over the concept of core. So
Okay.
core is a three-part required class, or I guess it's three classes that are required at Scripps. One is taken in the fall semester of your freshman year, and then this one is taken spring semester of your first year, and then the last one is taken in your fall semester of your sophomore year. And so all of those classes center around this concept or this main concept that's decided and switched every 3 years. And so for us, like we've already mentioned, the concept was truth. And so you have these professors, the core professors put together lectures and readings based on that concept to explore truth through different lenses and an interdisciplinary style.
I think just one more thing to mention would be that Core One is a class that you get put into, and it's kind of like required. So you don't really get to choose what you're like, who you're with, or anything like that. And then Core Two, you actually, and Core Three, you get to choose like kind of the discipline and what professor you're with, and more specifically, like what you're going to be focusing on. So I think that's just another thing to add.
Yeah, and I think in the past 2 years, I want to say, because I know the seniors didn't do this, but they combined the writing class with core. So core is meets the writing requirement and like the discussion requirement. So it's like both a writing class and a discussion based class. So Alyssa, when you heard about the core at Scripps, was that like something that bought you on the school? That were you were like, oh my goodness, I love this, or was it something you were like, it's okay, I'll still go to the school anyway, and I'll just be there?
I think even though I had heard a little bit about core before, I it wasn't something huge that stood out to me until I really looked at classes that I could kind of shadow online. So once I went to, it was actually a core 2 class that I got to sit in, but that was what really hooked me, and I really did think that it was just such a cool idea because it's not only just a bonding experience for first year students and everybody to kind of go through together, but it's also kind of like an intro to college classes. Kind of when I describe it to my friends, I usually just say it's kind of like a required kind of intro to humanities course that we all do with like a certain theme. So that's how I tend to think of it. But yeah, it really did hook me. I really do like it. I think of it less as like a requirement and more of something that I get to do, which is super cool. What about you?
Yeah, I mean, when I was talking to students about Core One, and even when you talk to like faculty about it, they're like, Core is the one thing that bonds students because they hate it so much. Like everyone just hates Core One, and you can talk about all of the readings and everything together and be like, oh, I hated that one. Um, and
Really?
yeah, that was that was my first impression of it was that everyone disliked it, and it was like a
Wow.
bonding experience for everyone. Um, but yeah, that was what I initially thought of it. Like that's what I heard about it. And then, I mean, I liked the concept. I thought it was interesting that you could they had this interdisciplinary way of looking at a single topic. And I think that our topic or the topic for our year was is also really interesting. It's something that like you we just accept all the time. Like we accept these truths, you don't necessarily question why sometimes, which is what we'll talk about later. But I mean, I like it. I think that core is a valuable experience, although I do know some people don't view it in that way based on who I've talked to.
Yeah, I definitely think when I first was even in my core class, we kind of had an introduction with our professor. I had Professor Nancy Williams, and she was just amazing. I feel like she really made the class a lot more interesting for me, a lot more engaging. Um, but yeah, I don't know, I just really thought the idea of truth was so interesting because honestly, you can talk about it in so many different ways within so many different disciplines, and you will probably have something to say about it forever, right? Because there's so many different truths and everything. But I find it really interesting that people bonded over not liking it. I can see, I don't know, that there's definitely some lectures that you will connect with more than others, or some readings that you're just like, oh, this is so long or
Can't do
something,
this.
right? Like one of
Yeah.
the readings that we had, it was that was not it for me. I forget. Oh my gosh, my memory. I forget the name of it, but it was like the longest one, the most difficult reading.
Was it the anthropology one?
I think I think so.
The one with the Gordian knot?
Yes. I think.
Yes.
Sorry. I know it's only been a couple months,
No, no, you're all good.
but
Yeah, I was trying to think, like, I feel like that one was the longest one. All I
yeah.
remember is that no one in my group knew what the Gordian knot was. And I was like, symbolism. And then I had to explain what the Gordian knot was.
Wow, really coming and helping out your team there, or helping out your
Yeah,
class.
I'm that useful. Yes, Alyssa and I were in two different core classes. Um, she already mentioned who she had. I had Professor Martin Vega, who was also really cool. He was more quiet, it sounds, than Professor Williams, but it was chill. But yeah, so Alyssa, what was actually we should talk about this too. Because of COVID-19, we were online, and so we couldn't do the regular everyone sits in the lecture hall and listens to the lecture together. So how did they make the adjustment to work online?
I think whether it's for good or for bad, you do end up bonding with people in core. So I think it actually worked out pretty well for my class. I mean, we have nothing to base it off of really,
That's very
what it
true.
would be like in person, but I think they did a pretty good job online.
Based on my understanding, I think the main differences were the fact that the lectures were asynchronous. You viewed them on Vimeo, and it was really funny because some people somehow found a way to like speed up the lectures on Vimeo. I didn't know that you could do that.
Yeah, I
For the
watched them
entire-
like normal.
Yeah. Honestly, it was better to watch them normal for me at
Yeah,
least, because then
I
you
actually
actually
really
hear.
liked the lectures.
Yes, they were
They
really
So,
interesting.
yeah, they were really interesting, and I like watching them on my own. I like being able to pause it to take notes
That is so nice.
or take screenshots of the pictures or quotes that they use, so I didn't have to like write it down.
That is very true. The online format worked really well for the lectures, at least.
It did. I think the only part that was really different was the discussions probably. I think it might have been a lot more engaging for some people to be in person and be able to talk with people in your class like that. But it was okay. It wasn't
Yeah.
horrible.
Yeah, I mean, I think the only other thing that was different was the fact that they had those question and answer sessions on Tuesdays. I don't think they
Yes.
had that when they were in person because you ask questions
Oh.
after the lectures.
Mhm.
But basically, every Tuesday, they would have a question and answer Zoom session with the professor who had given the lecture on or on Friday or over the weekend. And I don't know, did your professor assign you guys to go to the question and answer sessions?
Yes, she did. And I actually was the first person to go because I didn't see the Google form. So I was kind of signing up late. So nobody wanted to go first. And I was like, okay, I'll go. It was for a fellow, and it was with Professor Practice. He's also my academic advisor. So I felt pretty comfortable with going.
That's
But yeah,
awesome.
it was it was interesting. I think it was a little bit intimidating because I don't know, I'm just not used to very many people in a Zoom. You know, at most it's usually 30 people, and those Q&As had the most students in one Zoom for me. So that was a little bit intimidating just because I wasn't used to it as much. But how was your Q&A section? How did that go?
It was good. I think that I did the one even before Professor Prakas's with the citizen Carlin Wing, Professor Wing. I went to that one. And yeah, I agree. It was like so many people. And that was definitely the greatest number of people in any Zoom, considering my normal class, the largest group that I was in was like 30 people. And that one had to have had at least like 50. It's like, oh my goodness. But it was pretty cool. I went to the first one, so no one had any idea what they were doing. And I put a question in. It didn't get answered, but I participated, so yay.
I remember for my Q&A session, I got so nervous because I had a question. I had like a list of questions, but people ended up asking like the same kind of thing as like what I wanted to ask. So I got really nervous because I wasn't sure how participation was being graded,
Mm-hmm.
So I was like, I wanted to listen and I had to take notes, right, to report back to my class, but I was like, okay, I need to think of a new question because I still had
Yeah.
not gotten the hang of questions, I feel like. So my questions were not as up there as I would like them to be. But I think they're fine now. I think I grew
Yeah.
from the experience. But
Discussion questions, yo.
yeah.
Really important. Did you ask like the actual discussion question that you posed to your group at or in your class, or did you end up doing a different one?
I think I used a different one because I also wrote down some of the questions that my class had just in case because I wanted to like write down if they got answered a little bit from.
Oh,
They're also kind of like
nice.
my backups because I was like, hey, I'm representing the class, so I'll
Yes. Be
take that role to heart.
resourceful. Yes, you go, Alyssa. That's awesome. Yeah, and then how was your report back? How long did you have to report back to your group, your discussion section?
I think because I was the first person from my class to actually be assigned to go, I went a little bit overboard because I just really wasn't sure what the expectations were of me. I feel like I talked for too long. I think I had like a couple minutes or something, but I talked the entire time. I just, they also wanted to know what it was like going to a Q&A session, so I had to also talk about that. So I feel like I spent like 5 minutes talking. I don't know, that doesn't seem like that long, but to me, in the moment of talking, felt like forever. Um,
I know.
and
Yeah.
sometimes my professor even forgot to ask people to like give the report back. So sometimes like another week would have like multiple reports that
Oh
people.
my goodness.
It was a little bit unorganized sometimes, but it was still entertaining and it was fun.
That does sound fun. Yeah. I think our group, you were given 10 minutes supposedly to report back.
10
I don't
minutes.
think anyone actually filled the 10 minutes. But that's what it was on the schedule for like the first week was like 10 minutes of reporting
Wow.
back and asking questions of the person who went to go ask questions.
I guess the Q&A sessions are long, so that's not actually that much. I don't know. I can't imagine having to talk for 10 minutes about it.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure no one actually felt that. If they did, then props to them, and I just did not pay attention, apparently.
Yeah, I mean, that's impressive. Very thorough work.
Yes, we love that. Okay, but other than Q&As and lectures, we had discussion groups, which we've already moved into.
Yeah. But
And we also kind of talked about this with Grace.
yeah, a little bit. But I'm just curious, like, I know that our discussion groups seem to be very different for our classes, but were there any kind of topics that you guys got into having to do with truth that was just really surprising to you?
That's a really good question. So one of the topics that stood out to me was the section on art and modernism and realism. I think that was really interesting to talk about. And even within that section, we had we had students who were or interested in art history. So they were talking a lot about poses in like how people were posed in the photos and how that symbolized different things that I had never thought about before. I thought that was really interesting. um, I don't know. I gotta keep thinking about that question because that's so good. But did you have any topic or any like discussions?
I think we got a little bit deep for some of our discussions, but I think a huge topic that ended up coming up a lot was definitely religion. It's
Oh.
a it's a sensitive topic, especially with everything going on in the world right now, you know, politically and everything. But I think that was a really nice topic and really interesting for us to talk about because it's hard, you know, it's hard to talk about something like religion because it's so close to people's hearts and a lot of people have such strong feelings about it, which is totally like respectable, you know.
Yeah.
But I think that was a great example of core one being a space, at least for our class, that you could really talk about things that were really important to you and like be not as afraid to be judged, you know? So I think that was a really great topic that we ended up getting into, and it was really relevant to the times and everything.
Yeah. I feel like Core One did a really good job of addressing current events, like even throughout the classes, even though the lectures had been pre-recorded and everything.
Yeah.
I know that in our class, police brutality came up a lot, or I guess
Mhm.
it didn't come a lot, but it came up towards the end. And immigration laws and immigration in general came up, especially since our professor had done the border uh, Codex Expangliensis lecture. So he was very into that. And so we had a really long discussion about the, that whole section.
Yeah. I think starting with um, pieces or readings such as Citizen and Othello was really a great way to start the semester. It was really impactful. It was kind of surprising to start out the semester with such, you know, like huge topics about race and with Black Lives Matter happening in the summer, like hugely starting, I think, in the summer. That was just such an interesting start to the semester. It almost felt like we didn't have enough time to talk about some of that stuff because they were just such huge topics and such important topics. Um, but how did you feel about like starting the semester off so with a bang, you know?
I honestly appreciated it. I thought it was a really strong move on their part because based on what I've talked to sophomores about, they said that Citizen was at the end last year. So they switched the rotation of books around, and I thought that was a good move because it really drew me in as a student just to be able to talk about those issues and really dive into what was happening in our world because this 2020 in itself was just so much. Like we had like just two events, Black Lives Matter, COVID-19 as a pandemic. Okay, this isn't two events. And then even like the presidential election, we talked about like persuasion. I thought that was really interesting how it covered so many things at the specific times that were necessary to cover them and feel current.
Yes, I definitely agree with you. I I feel like because we started with Citizen and Othello, I don't know, they just were so applicable to the other readings throughout the semester as well. You know, it's like a really good base reading to be able to connect to everything else, you know. I
That's very true.
I am glad we started with that. I don't know how it would have been if we had ended with that. That would have definitely been a different experience.
I know those two readings were very relevant throughout the whole course because while they did address racial issues, there were also so many other topics within there that spanned throughout the rest of the readings, and so it kind of gets the ball rolling as you read through the other books and essays, and then you have to think about all of those things. I'm curious, did you have a favorite reading?
I think it changed. You know, I think Minor Feelings really stood out to me immediately when I started reading it. It was just such an interesting and just thoughtful piece of writing where I was able to kind of talk about it outside of school a lot with my parents and just other people in general. So that was definitely one of my favorite ones in the beginning. I think also Letters from a Proving Woman was so just made me laugh. I don't know why. I don't know why. I can't tell you why, but it was just so my class really did not like that reading.
My
because
class did that either.
and I'm not saying that it was a favorite of mine. So Minor Feelings is definitely my favorite, but Letters from a Preparing Woman really did make me laugh. I don't know why. I can't tell you why, but because I think everyone hated it so much. It just and I
It
even
was so absurd. Like
yeah, I
the
even told my
concept of it.
it was just so I feel like there was just so much to talk about, and it was just so I don't know. It was just very entertaining for me. Just reading something so absurd.
Yes. It was entertaining enough for me that I wrote my second paper on that because I
Yes,
was
me too.
like, there's just too much to talk about here.
Right?
But
I
that
had
was
to
also the
reread it too.
challenge.
I was like,
I
oh
know.
right.
There was
I
just so
forgot.
much to talk about. It's like you can't not address that.
I think it was really interesting for me because when I first read it, of course, I was like, this is some parts I was just like, this is ridiculous. Even just like the Olivia on the boat and then just having this man who's like basically teaching her French just so she can say like I love you and all these really creepy things. I I just think it was just really interesting to like read that from of course being in this perspective sitting in 2020 or now 2021 and just trying to think about how this would have applied to when it was written and how it would have been digested differently. So I think that was kind of a
That's
stretch
very
for
true.
me because I am coming from this way different perspective, but that was really interesting to me.
That's very true. It's so weird to think that so it was accepted so differently than it would be now. But I think that also has to do with the demographic who is reading
Yeah.
it. Oh my goodness. But yes, I do. I also loved Minor Feelings. I think that was the one core reading that I just didn't want to put down. Like I think I don't want to say I sped read the book because I did closely read the book when I was reading it. I annotated the book. But that was like the one that I was like, "Oh my goodness, I love this book so much." It's like it was depressing in some parts, but it was still so thought invoking. I was like, "Oh,
Yeah. I think what I really loved about Minor Feelings was that I didn't necessarily have to agree with like the author's thought process throughout the entire book, but I still could like I could feel where she was coming from. I could like there were so many beautiful insights I feel like throughout it and it just really made me think. And I when I was going through it with my mom, I actually ended up reading it out loud for her, which also was just such an interesting experience for me because I was like, wow, it really hits different. It just feels really different when you're reading it out loud, kind of. I don't know. It's such a small act, but I recommend it reading the book
that's
out
so
loud.
yes, I will have to do that now. I know I gave the book to my mom. I was like, "You need to read this," but
Me
then I might have to
too.
take it back. Just gonna let her read it.
Yeah,
I'll
steal it
take it
back.
back after and read it out loud. That's such a good idea, though.
I just feel like I learned so much, even just history wise. Like
Yeah.
some things I feel like I really should have known before. There's just some things that you learn in history that are just so there's not even like a strong enough word for it. I feel like not depressing doesn't even like fit, you know? Just
Mhm.
some things that happen are just so heartbreaking you can't even believe that it's real. But I feel like sometimes I unfortunately just have such a not great memory sometimes. So sometimes I have to like reread it over and over again to be like, "Oh, wow, this was real. This was happening. It's not talked about enough." And I think that was something that Minor Feelings did really really well.
Yeah, and I think that's also I do appreciate Professor Everett for choosing that book, and I think it was interesting to consider the reason for including it within the core curriculum was because of the COVID-19 pandemic and the fact that Asian Americans were receiving so much backlash because of the origins, supposedly.
Yeah. And I feel like it wasn't talked about enough.
Mm-hmm.
For sure. It was just kind of brushed over because everything else that was happening in general in the world just kind of took away that moment of insight into the Asian American experience. So I was really glad that we got to. Also, it was just, I thought it was so cool that it was just such a new piece of writing. You usually, when you read things in school, they're like super old, and many classes have read it before. And you're like, how is this related to my life now? How is it related to the world right now? But I just thought it was really nice that it was it was a new piece of writing.
Yeah, I honestly think that speaks to the core curriculum. I know that so many people don't like it, but they do try and make it current, which I really appreciate.
Yeah. And this was just such 2020 was just such a great year to be talking about everything that we did and just focusing on that theme of truth,
Oh my goodness, truth is such a good topic this
right?
year.
Yeah.
Like the timing could not have been better. And the fact that it's like right in the middle means that next year's first year students are going to get to talk about truth too. And who knows what is going to go on in 2021. Final question for you, Alyssa.
Yes.
Do you know what truth is? Or what is the Okay, wait, we got to restart that because that was
That's
a
too deep.
bad.
What? How am I supposed to
I
answer
don't know.
that?
Do you think that the class actually like helped you better understand the concept of truth?
I think the class, what I took away from it was that there's so many different versions of truth, and like something to be true is usually when experts of society or like people kind of higher up in society are like, let's all collectively agree that this thing is true. Like that's how our government was made. That's how things were made. What's intriguing to me is that what I took away from it was really about personal truth, how there's just so many different versions of truth. And like, was there a diagram where it's like
Personal, and then community, and then global or
universal?
universal. There you go.
I think that was my biggest takeaway about truth, that there's just so many different versions of it. It depends on the person. So I think it really just, this class or like core one really taught me how to be a lot more open-minded and to be able to listen at least to people's truths and then see what I take away from it after.
Yeah.
What about you? Biggest takeaways from the class? Did you learn about truth? Did you find out the meaning of
The
the
meaning
word
of
truth?
truth. Yes, I totally know what that is. I'm an expert now.
Congratulations, you passed the class.
Thank you. Yes. No, I mean, I think you covered basically everything I wanted to say.
Sorry.
You're so smart. I think the only other thing I can add on to that is the fact that truth doesn't I said to me, one of my takeaways was that truth doesn't necessarily exist. It's a concept. It to me, it's not necessarily like a social construct because we like money or wealth and race and all that stuff. I think it's a form of construct that we've somehow decided makes sense, and so you keep everyone else within this idea that they have to maintain that construct. But yeah, I think you did a really good job of explaining everything, and I think the class did a very good job of touching on a lot of concepts. Okay, well, I guess that's all we have for you guys today. I hope this gave you a little bit more insight to our time in Core 1 at Scripps during a pandemic when we were not able to discuss face to face, but we were still able to take the class.
And I hope you guys are looking forward to the next episode.
Thank you guys so much for listening. We'll see you next time. Bye.
Bye.